Member for Sturgeon River, Parkland.
Excellent job, Madam Speaker. Thank you. I rise today to address the matter at hand, of course, that being the Canada-US-Mexico agreement. And I hope the Speaker will indulge me for a few moments, as this is my first speech in this new Parliament, and I just want to thank a few people who are critical for me being here today. So first and foremost, I wouldn't be here without my wife, Rachel, and she's always been my rock, and she's always supported me in all my political endeavors, so thank you, Rachel. And my family, and I will admit some of them didn't vote Conservative in this last election, but they still stood beside me and they've supported me the entire way. And particularly, I'd like to thank my mother, Rebecca, and my grandparents, Cindy Lou and Graham. I'd also like to thank my hardworking campaign team under the leadership of Cherise Giesbrecht, Imelda McLaren, Tom Cox, Barb Kostash, Jesse Ferber, Julia Roy, Luke Inberg, and Chris Alex, along with all those who poured countless hours into door knocking, constructing signs, and fundraising. And I'm also indebted to my board president, Susan Evans, and my financial agent, Dennis Francis. And I'd like to thank some others, Murray Kulak, Ben and Josh Sawatsky, Jody DeRouge, Ed Bassaraba, Tim and Julie Milligan, Fran and Andrew Wolthuis, and Marco Melissa. Without your support, I wouldn't be here today. And finally, I want to thank my constituents in Sturgeon River Parkland, who gave me a resounding 77.5% of the vote. Over 53,000 people have sent me here to Ottawa. That's 10,000 more than the previous record set in my riding. And with that strong mandate, I come to speak before this House on an issue that is of great importance to the people of my riding. And that is our relationship with our largest trading partners, the United States and Mexico. Now, Sturgeon River Parkland is comprised of the counties of Sturgeon, Parkland, and Lac St. Anne, as well as the major centres of Spruce Grove, Stony Plain, and Morinville, all of which lie to the north and west of Edmonton. And this constituency has many charming small towns like Onaway, Legal, Gibbons, Bonaccord, and Redwater. We are proud to be part of Treaty 6 territory, and we include the communities of Alexander and Enoch, which are members of the Cree Nation. Now, the people of these communities have been watching the trade negotiations with interest and great concern. There is a growing value-added plastics industry in the Alberta industrial heartland in my riding. There is a groundbreaking new oil refinery in Redwater. There are thousands of farmers across our riding who are growing potatoes, canola, lentils, as well as cattle farmers, dairy farmers, and chicken farmers. We are home to Canada's top value-added pet food producers, a lumber industry which has suffered under high tariffs from the United States. And we also have the largest privately held steel fabricator in Western North America, not just Canada, North America. Now, all of these important industries provide thousands of jobs for Canadians in my riding and across Canada. But we have seen very little from this Liberal government to address their challenges. Now, I'm going to delve a little deeper into those challenges. The government is repeatedly claiming that all is well and that there's nothing to see here when we look at this trade agreement. But Canadians are watching as our trade position in this world, particularly with the United States, grows more and more precarious. Here are a few examples of the concerns of my community that I'm hoping this government will address. On January 24th, just a couple weeks ago, the United States announced further trade action against our fabricated steel industry. Now, a year ago, the Americans initiated trade action against our fabricated steel industry, and on September 4th of this last year, the Department of Commerce found that there was little to no evidence to show that our fabricated steel industry was impacting the United States industry. Despite that positive ruling, our fabricated steel industry continues to face an unrelenting attack from American competitors. And just a few short days ago, the Department of Commerce made their decision to impose a 6.7% tariff on Canadian fabricated steel imports. Now, a final appeal is yet to be heard, but I have seen little from this government to show that they are considering the challenges of our fabricated steel industry. Now, we're debating the ratification of a trade agreement, and as we speak, our competitors are attempting to kneecap our industry. Does this sound like a successful free trade agreement? Thousands of jobs across Canada are at stake. Hundreds of jobs in my riding are at risk, and yet the Liberals are doing nothing to stand up for our steel fabricators, an essential value-added industry. The government is so desperate to ram through this agreement that they are ignoring the erosion of our domestic industry, and to add insult to injury, we are further opening up the procurement market in Canada to foreign competitors in the US, the very same competitors who are seeking to put tariffs on their Canadian competitors. Now, I ask the government, how will the new trade agreement prevent the United States from discriminating against our steel industry at will? How are we going to make sure that we have a fair and level playing field for our steel fabricators, among others? Now, aside from our steel industry, we have an industry that has suffered even more severe damage over the past few years. Our softwood lumber industry remains at the mercy of our American competitors. We need certainty, rules, and a vision for a prosperous future that our hardworking men and women in the lumber industry deserve. In the United States, over 8 million homes were constructed last year, homes that needed Canadian wood products. At the same time, Canada has seen the closure of 9 mills and reduced production in dozens of others. As of October 2019, over 2 billion, that's billion with a B, board feet in production has been curtailed in Canada. Meanwhile, the price of lumber in the United States has skyrocketed by 33%. It doesn't take an economist to see that the laws of supply and demand are not being followed. The price of a product is going up significantly, but here in Canada, we're cutting production and facing mill closures. Why? Is it because this Liberal government has failed to take this opportunity to act and achieve a deal for our softwood lumber producers that would ensure sustainability and prosperity for years to come? Now, ultimately, we need to delve deeper into the details of this trade agreement. The government, however, has refused to share their internal economic analysis with us. What do they have to hide? Clearly, there are areas where Canada is getting a raw deal, and this must be addressed immediately. Canadians want to see transparency and accountability from this government. What will the impact on our supply-managed agri-food sector be? How will Canada continue to diversify its trade when the United States can withhold their signature on our agreements? How can we ensure that Canadian companies and the Canadian shareholders who trust their retirement savings to these companies will be treated fairly by foreign governments? All of these are important areas where Canada has relinquished control and where we are vulnerable. Now, in the end, we need to ask ourselves, will this deal protect and grow a sustainable industrial base in Canada? The kind of base that we can depend upon to provide the middle-class jobs and prosperity that previous generations have enjoyed as their birthright. We continue to see the hollowing out of our industry to low-cost jurisdictions. We see an American tiger cutting taxes and regulations aimed at enticing Canadian job creators to America. And Canada only seems to be moving in the opposite direction. The only companies we can get to invest here are the ones that the government has to write a big taxpayer check to. Now, in conclusion, without a clear economic analysis provided by the government, one thing that I can conclude is that this trade deal does little to move our country forward, but rather maintains a status quo, and a status quo that we quickly see eroding under our very feet. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Good job.
Questions et commentaires?
Questions and comments?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Okay. You know, Madam Speaker, the members, and we've had a number of Conservatives say this, they want this clear economic understanding. They want that impact study completed. And I think in part, Madam Speaker, they need to realize that this isn't just one or two people sitting in a room that sat back and came up with an agreement. This is something that's taken a couple of years to hit the point that we are at today. There have been many discussions, thousands of discussions that have taken place. There's been provinces, different stakeholders, whether it's labor, business, you name it, that have recognized that this particular agreement that we're debating today will further advance the interests of Canada well into the future. And that is something in which we need to recognize. It is not something that should be new to any caucus. Even the current caucus, the Conservative caucus, was provided the opportunity to be able to have more and more details. My question to the member is, would he not agree that this has been a discussion, a topic for discussion, for well over 2 years now?
The honourable member for Sturgeon River Parkland.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. And if I could summarize the honourable parliamentary secretary's question to me, it's just trust us. It's a great deal, but you don't have to see any of the details because we can't trust you with those details. And Madam Speaker, I don't need to be lectured by the parliamentary secretary because I had the honour of working for the member for Abbotsford when he served as Canada's Minister of International Trade. And under his Conservative leadership, we achieved the Canada-South Korea Free Trade Agreement and the Canada-European Trade Agreement. And those are trade agreements that we can be very proud of for our country. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
I'm out there. Questions and comments. The honourable member for Foothills.
For his excellent speech, and one of the things that he touched on, I just want him to elaborate a little bit, is we've just heard that the United States has signed a free trade agreement with China that will have a potentially devastating impact on Canadian agriculture, maybe as much as $40 billion in an agricultural trade between those two countries, which will certainly impact ours. The United States beat us to the punch. When we sign the new NAFTA agreement, we will not be able to enter free trade agreements with countries like China and Vietnam without having first have the approval of the United States. I don't know any other free trade agreement that Canada has ever signed that has signed off our sovereignty and trade and future deals with another country. I'd like my colleague to talk about the impact this will have on his riding.
Member for Sturgeon River Park.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. I thank my honourable colleague for that question. And before I answer it, I just want to say my heart and the heart of all the people of Sturgeon River Parkland are with the Chinese people as they currently go through this terrible pandemic in Wuhan and across the world, Madam Speaker. So our hearts and prayers are with them. And in my riding, we're very strongly invested in beef production, canola production. We're very in the steel industry. And with the United States signing a new trade agreement with China, we are significantly disadvantaged. And Canada, we haven't seen the resolution of the canola crisis with China yet, and we haven't seen any forward progress on that. And unless we see that kind of forward progress, our farmers are going to continue to be disadvantaged and lose market share.
Questions et commentaires. Questions and comments. The honourable member for South Okanagan, Westcoott.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I'd like to thank my colleague for his speech. He mentioned softwood lumber. It's a subject that's very close to the concerns of my riding and others in British Columbia. And I just wondered if he could expand on those comments. One of the things that I was heartened to see is that the Chapter 19 provisions of the old NAFTA are still in this new agreement so that we can go to NAFTA panels to battle these tariffs, these illegal tariffs that the United States have put on. I'm just wondering if he could expand on that and how it would play into the disputes that are now still before a couple of those panels.
The honourable member for Sturgeon River Parkland.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I thank the member for his question. He has the privilege of coming from one of the most beautiful ridings in Canada and southern BC. And the softwood lumber, I can't speak to the panels that are being disputed at this point. However, we have to look at some of the challenges that we can address in Canada to make our softwood lumber industry more competitive. And one thing that we've seen is that in the province of British Columbia, the stumpage fees are much higher than they are for the province of Alberta, for example. So we've seen a disproportionate amount of closures in British Columbia over Alberta. And so that's something that we can address as a country. However, in terms of getting market access to the United States, without that critical market access, I'm talking to American home builders, and it's raising the cost of a house by $6,000 a house. Surely we can make a strong argument for Canada wood products to be entering the United States on a fair and level playing field.
Resuming debate.